Mystery Theory. Today we're going to talk about the case that is known as the girl in the barrel. It will take us back to 1999, and it has a series of twists, and it's definitely a different kind of setting for this case. So, before I move on, I want to remind everyone that you're able to watch my videos ad-free if you join my membership and get 4 extra videos a month if you decide to join Patreon. So check those links out. They will be in the link down below. Now, again, we're gonna go back to September the 2nd, 1999. By the way, at that time, I was almost ready to have my son. It was on September 14th of that year, so it kind of brings me back to that time. But this happened in Jericho, New York. In case you haven't heard of Jericho, it's about 30 miles from Midtown Manhattan, and it kind of started at Ronald Cohen home, and he was getting ready to sell his house, and he actually had somebody very interested in the property. He was asking at the time $455,000, and the new owner wanted to take this kind of final walk before actually signing the papers. Now, a very interesting thing that I don't know if every buyer does, but maybe this is a typical thing, and it is not for me, but this buyer asked to not only do a walkthrough, but also go under in the crawl space. This was beneath an addition that had been built onto the back of the house, and it was about 30 years before that they built it. The crawl space was only 36 inches, so the guys had to hunch down to get through the space. They noticed something at the end, or at the back, the very back of the crawl space, and it was a 55-gallon barrel that was on its side because, again, it would have been too tall to fit there, and it was carefully placed, kind of wedged beneath the stairs. The buyers asked, Mr. Cohen, the owner, about the barrel, and he said that it had been there since he bought the property, and he'd been living there for about 10 years. He said he had no idea what was in it or how it got there. Once they got to it, they this case, the buyer said he wanted it removed before he would purchase the property. So, the homeowner and his real estate agent got some help and rolled the barrel out from underneath this crawl space. And they actually took it to the curb for the trash, with the rest of the trash, so it could be picked up by the what they call trash workers. I'm assuming it's the people that pick up the trash. Now, when these workers showed up the next day, they told the homeowner that the barrel was 355 pounds and too heavy for them to take away. So they asked him to empty it to make sure that there was nothing hazardous or toxic inside, and to be able to lift it. Now, this sounds very old school, but even where we live right now, it is not one of those big trucks that they have the metal arms that lift the garbage bins. Where we live, we have a trash truck, and there are a couple of guys in the back that come and basically pick up the bins one by one, empty them into the truck by lifting them, and then put them back where you left them. So it is not so old school as you might think. This still happens today in rural communities, and one of the things that they tell you is make sure you have a lid so water doesn't get inside the trash can, because of how heavy water is, especially mixed with garbage. They ask you not to dispose of hazardous materials that will go to the landfill with the rest of the stuff that they will burn. So, just so you have an idea, the garbage company did what they usually do, not because they thought what is inside this that it's kind of suspicious, but because of how things work. Now, however, I find very interesting that the homeowner and the real estate agent didn't open this barrel before, but they decided to put it out for the garbage truck. I think I would have been interested in knowing what was inside. You would think that maybe in these older homes, maybe they were hiding something important inside, but apparently they were just not interested. So they opened it after the garbage service said that they needed to empty it. So they opened it, and there was a metal seal around the top of the barrel. So it actually took some work to open it. Then they started to smell something terrible. They removed completely the lid. They they saw a curled human hand and a woman's shoe. The barrel was filled with a green fluid surrounded by tiny plastic pellets. So the homeowner immediately called the police. The police took the barrel to the forensics lab, where they emptied it into a large white tarp, so it would be easier to collect any evidence. Inside the barrel, they found a small mummified girl. The body had been crumpled over and bent in half to fit into that barrel, and it was sealed so tightly that her body was well preserved, with skin with a kind of a consistency of rubber. But when it hit the air, it began decaying quickly, and it was immediately taken away for an autopsy. For some people, this sounds kind of crazy. For so long, the body being there, but the factor to consider is that it was sealed. In that way, oxygen didn't get in, and that way kind of not only helped mummify the body, but also stop the natural decay that happens when a body is exposed to oxygen and not sealed tightly as this one was. Now, during the autopsy, they determined that the body was a girl of Hispanic descent. She was very small, only about 4'9" tall. She had black hair and some gold bridge work on her teeth. Now, that is a very, very typical kind of dental work for me, because I know that happens where I'm from, or it did happen when I lived there. But this kind of dental work was not used here in the US. So they knew that this was done somewhere in South America. Again, because of how fast they were able to do this autopsy, they determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. They believed that someone used a hammer of some sort to smash her head 7 to 10 times, so much so that crushed her skull. To make things worse, they determined that she was 8 to 9 months pregnant. also found a woman's purse with some makeup inside and a badly damaged address book, which was very popular back then when people didn't have cell phones. They would carry this address book with names, phone numbers, and even addresses of their family members, friends, and important places. They also found a green stem from a plastic flower arrangement. Something interesting was the jewelry that they found. 2 gold rings, one of them with an inscription reading AIM-HR in Roman numbers 1011 or X11, and a locket that was engraved and said, "To Patras, love, Uncle Phil." Now, the pages of the address book were badly damaged and stuck together with all the liquid inside the barrel. They still tried and put it in a forensic drying cabinet for a few days to try to dry it out. The following day, detectives began researching to find out where the barrel may have come from. The owner, Mr. Cohen, explained that it's been there for the longest time, or since he moved there. So detectives began going back and through the prior owners to find out who built the extension on that house. And they eventually found who built the extension. It was now a 71-year-old guy that lived in Boca Raton, Florida. His name was Howard Elkins. He was the one that not only built that extension, but he was the homeowner for many years and sold the house back in 1972 and retired when he closed his plastics business that he owned in Manhattan. The police at this point wanted to go visit him and get more information, but they needed to do their research before actually, kind of let him know what they were doing. One of the sides of the barrel, again, while they were looking up this guy and trying to research as much as they could, they were still going through the evidence that they had. So, on the barrel, on its side, there were printed letters GAF, which turned out to be a chemical company based in New Jersey. So police took photos of the barrel and brought some of the used the same kind of pellets that my dad used to work with. And those pellets are what they're used for many plastic products, including plastic flowers. But the green dye was a unique product called halogen green, and it was specifically used to make plastic flower bases in the 60s. So they looked up who was buying that from them in the 60s, and the only customer they had found was this company called Melrose Plastic. And you probably know it by now, but or assume, but yes, Melrose Plastics was the same company that Howard Elkins had closed in 1972. So the guy that built the extension, the original homeowner that retired and moved to Florida. Now, the forensic lab was still working on the damaged address book, and they were able to get it dried enough to where they could get the pages separated, but the ink was completely disintegrated from the pages. So they ended up using a device called a video spectral comparator, and by using that device they were able to read some of the information on the documents. And they had to use this different light, and it was a very intricate process, but they were able to decipher the first notation in the book, and it was a number that the name started with a letter A, and it happened to be a resident alien number. So the kind of card you get when you move to the US, if you're not a citizen or you don't have family, if you're going to be naturalized, all those things that happened before. So this resident alien number gave them a clue, and detectives spoke with immigration officers. The number was from 30 years ago, and their system had changed since then. So it would take time for immigration to come back with a result or a match. However, at this point, they knew that the plastic and the dye all came from Howard Elkins' business. And they found all this under his former home. So detectives believed that they had enough information to finally take the trip to Florida and actually question him. They still decided to visit his business partner in the plastic flower business, Melvin Gutman, and this is also a guy that retired to Boca Raton. He confirmed that Mr. Gratman and Mr. Elkin were business partners, but he said that they never kept in touch after retiring. Detectives showed a photo of the barrel most useful information Catman gave was that something he recalled from back in the late 60s. He said that his partner, Mr. Elkins, was having an affair with a Hispanic employee at the company and that he rented an apartment for her. Now, he didn't remember her name, but he remembered that she had some kind of interesting gold teeth in the front and long black hair. He also remembered getting a phone call from the landlord of the apartment that, his partner was renting for her. And he was looking for the partner because now the apartment was empty, but the belongings were still in the apartment. And this is how they described it. But basically, she wasn't there. So it wasn't empty. It was full of her stuff, and he needed it to be taken out. So detectives were now more convinced that the 71-year-old Elkins, Mr. Elkins, was the killer. So they went to his home, and Mr. Elkins invited them in. When they asked some of the things that his partner, Mr. Catman, shared with detectives, he didn't quite remember. He didn't remember the barrel or working with them, the dye, or the plastic pellets. It was like he erased that from his memory. But when detectives asked him if he had an affair during that time, he said he did. But he also said that it was short and it ended when she left him. Now, detectives asked him, was she pregnant? And, or what was her name too? But he said that he didn't remember. Detectives informed him that that girl was found pregnant and deceased in a barrel beneath his former house. But when police, he seemed completely fine by then. He didn't act like, oh my goodness, I got caught. But when the police asked him for a sample of his DNA, he said no. And at that point, his phone rang, and it was his wife. He hung up the phone and he asked detectives to leave. He said his wife was coming home and that the two of them would have a lot to talk about. Now, these were New York detectives, so they had no jurisdiction in Florida to get a warrant or make an arrest. But they told him before leaving that they would be back with a warrant and that he was going to go to jail for the rest of his life. Early the next morning, the detectives received a call from the local Palm Beach Police Department. father's garage in the back seat of their Ford Explorer. Apparently that morning he went to Walmart and purchased a 12-gauge Mossberg shotgun. He sat in the back seat of that SUV, put it between his leg and the barrel in his mouth, and guess what happened? At this point, police had no questions about if he was guilty or not, but detectives still collected his DNA from the scene and took it back to New York, where it was confirmed that he was the father of the baby. As soon as they returned to New York, 8 days after the barrel was found, they heard from immigration with the identity of the victim. Her name was Reina Angelica Moroccan, and she had immigrated to the U.S. in 1966 from El Salvador. And the forensic document team also got some information from the address book. They got names, addresses, and phone numbers. The phone numbers were over 30 years old, so they didn't have much hope, but they called anyways. One of the phone numbers still worked, and the woman that answered, Kathy Andrade, was a close friend of Reina and was still living at the same location 3 decades later. They talked to Kathy, who identified Reina from a 30-year-old immigration photo. She confirmed that, yes, she immigrated from El Salvador and worked making plastic flowers at the Melrose Plastics in the 60s. In November of 1968, Reina had told Kathy that she had been dating her boss at the flower factory and that she was pregnant with his baby. Kathy didn't know his name, only that it was Reina's boss at the factory. Reina also shared that she had made a terrible mistake. She told Kathy that she was so mad at her lover friend that she called his wife. And she told his wife that her husband was having an affair with her and that promised to divorce his wife and marry her. And now that she was pregnant with his baby. Reina told Kathy that she felt like that made him so angry that she was afraid that he would kill her. And it seems like she was right, because that was the last time that Kathy ever heard from Reina. Kathy also shared one night she went to Reina's apartment and there were 2 plates set out for dinner. The dinner was still warm on the stove, but Reina was not there, so she called the police at the time to report her as missing, but was told that if she wasn't a family member, that she couldn't file a missing persons report. She tried to call Reina every day for weeks after that, but never heard from her, and eventually gave up. research cases where things like this happen, you know. Parents that have kids, for lack of a better word, go missing, not necessarily being kids, but sometimes adults that live for the longest time trying to either find somebody responsible for what happened to their children or to their daughter or son, or waiting for them to show up somewhere because they went missing. I find that is very interesting and very true. I don't think it's destiny. I think it's human will. My grandma, my dad's mom, she died before I was born, and she had a heart attack very young, in her 40s. And my grandfather died a few months, like I think it was a couple months later. And he had been struggling with his health, but I think that the determining factor that he went so fast, even though doctors said he wouldn't, necessarily would have to die that fast because of his illness. I honestly think he died of a broken heart. And as a mother, I can't even imagine how this mother had felt for so many years when her daughter in another country stopped calling, and not being able to look for her because you are in a completely different country, different place, and not able to go there. Such a devastating story, and it started under the most weird circumstances of the selling of a house. The new homeowner wanted that removed. The garbage people not being able to pick it up. What if it was one of those trucks that would have lifted and just emptied it inside? I think that Reina wanted her body found, wanted her story told, and it took 30 plus years, but now we know what happened to her. I've read different things where they were blaming her for, talking to the wife and some other theories, and I'm like, okay, that's just dumb. We all do things that we're not proud of in the end. And we all do things that some of us consider okay, and some other ones consider immoral. I'm not here to judge her character as a woman or as a person, but I don't think anybody deserves to be killed because you become a problem for somebody else. What a coward move for this guy, Howard. And when he was finally going to have to pay for what he did that to himself, I mean, that's such a bad move. Anyways, I would love to know what you think about this case today. Thank you so much for being here today. Oh, and this was also series of books that I'm reading. So I'll have the information about the writer in the description box.